Okay, let's get started. This will be lesson one, topic A, and a brief introduction to the whole course. The course description. Well, what we want to do is we want to cover the knowledge and skills needed to manage a project, and we'll talk about why that's important. Basically, it comes down to time is money. You want to get a project done as fast as possible, as cheaply as possible. So some of the objectives. First of all, we're going to learn the software. Project 2016. We're actually going to create and define a new project plan. We're going to organize our tasks, create an organized task to get that project done, manage the resources needed to get the task done, and finally we're going to finalize a plan so we come out with a plan that we can use to do a project. Well, back 100 years ago, when I was in the Army, I was stationed at Fort Lewis, and I was part of the Rapid Deployment Force, which was just getting started. The goal was to get from about 2 weeks to deploy and fight down to about 2 days. We could deploy anywhere in the world and be ready to fight. Well, we studied project management back when I was in school, and we didn't have computers, so we actually did this by hand. So what we did is we laid out everything we needed to do to deploy, from call the Air Force, pack up our personal gear, load helicopters on the planes and things like that. And we got there. We went from 2 weeks to 2 days. In the real world, I'll give you a real world example. This happened right in Mississippi County. There was a pipe company that used to take 23 hours to change over their line. And it was costing them about $14 million a year to do a changeovers, just to shut down. So what we did is we used Project, and we went back. We said, what does it take to change over that line? And we got from 23 hours down to about 4 hours, and it saved 12 million bucks by their own account. Huge. This is huge. So what we're going to do in this lesson, we're going to communicate a project's purpose and status. Biggest complaint in any organization is the lack of communication. This is a very good way to communicate. It's in black and white. It's right there, and you can get color coded. Very good way to communicate. You also need to know what your tasks, resources, and scheduling to get this thing done, the project done. And also, it's a good way to keep status. Where are you right now? And you can communicate that to the people that are paying your bills, the management part. And we're also going to take a little bit and look at the big picture of Microsoft project. And we're going to understand some basic Microsoft or some basic project management concepts. There's a couple objectives for this lesson. First of all, identify the project management concepts. What is project management? And also different phases of a project. And we're actually going to open up the software a bit and play with it. So that's our objectives. So what is a project? Well, it's temporary, right? This is not something you normally do, so it's just a temporary thing, right, to achieve results. It has a defined starting point and a target endpoint, right? Some examples: develop new cars. They used to take like 7 years, right? It's down to about, I heard, about 4 months if they really want to crunch it. Reduce changeover time in factories, we talked a bit about, and also reduce construction time on new buildings. In China, a 40-story skyscraper, they can build one in less than 2 years. Just amazing. And this is all done by project management. So these are the 5 groups, right? What happens? So the first thing you got to do is to get initiated. And what you're going to do is you're probably going to develop a chart. This is where you define the goals and get authorization to do the project. And then the Microsoft project kicks in. You start doing the planning. What's the scope? What's your target? What are you going to do with this thing? How much time do you have? How much cost do you have? Any other details that will affect getting this project done? This is where you develop the project plan. Then you execute. You look at that plan and make it happen. You start doing the tasks that are in that plan. You start allocating resources to make sure those tasks get done, to get that plan done. And then monitoring and controlling. You want to keep track on course, right? And no project usually goes perfectly every time. So you correct what needs to be correcting, and you keep on going, right? And the final thing is you close. And this is where the authorizing group buys off on the product, services, or end results. And this is actually gets kicked out of the Microsoft project part of it. So these are the 5 groups. Okay, this is just a picture of the 5 groups. What happens, right? This part right here, this is where you start using project. So you get like a feedback loop, right? So you got what's planned, and what's happening is you're executing it. And again, and you say, well, how well did I execute to the plan? You're always making adjustments to this thing. The project plan is a living document. It changes as you have to change it. But it's a starting point. It lets you know your status. It's a good way to communicate. That's what this is all about. And it gets updated every time you do a feedback loop like this. So what is a constraint? A constraint is anything that basically limits or keeps you from doing what you have to do, right? Fights against you. It goes against the current that you want to do. So anything that constrains or dictates a project team is a project constraint. These are the things that will try to keep you from getting your project done. In project management, there's the big three. That's scope, time, and cost. These will always be constraints in any project, always. Here's the bad part. You change one. Let's say you change the cost. Well, that's going to affect your scope and time also. Or you change the scope, time, and cost change, right? They're all related. Change one, they all change. That's called the big triple constraint. Now, this is a picture. It's got the big three in there, but I also want to include three others that are always a big one: resources, quality, and risk. Let's say you change the time. Well, it might affect your quality. Or you change the time, might affect safety. You might have a risk. Change your time, resources might not be available, right? And costs, that will certainly affect all of those. And also scope, right? So these are the big three. In addition, I got the other three, the 6 project constraints. Another thing you have to be careful of, that's scope creep. This is where the project gets bigger than you initially planned. They ask you to do more than what you originally agreed to, right? Scope creep. So let's get an example, right? You're doing a changeover, and all of a sudden say, well, in addition to changeover, let's also do a complete TPM while we're doing this, and in the same amount of time. Yeah, I mean, don't let that happen, right? If you didn't buy off on it, don't do it. You got to be very careful of this thing, right? I've seen it happen quite a bit, and people that are authorized it, they'll push you on this. They want this. They'll do this every time, right? Every time. So be careful of scope creep. Let's talk about the different roles in project management. And these are going to be separated, but they could be sometimes the same person, right? It doesn't always have to be distinct, right? So the first one is project manager. This is a man or woman who's directing the project's flow. He's the one keeping everything on track. He's also responsible for the communication amongst the different participants in the project. He or she's a head dog, right? Making this thing happen. Leads the planning. He's responsible for controlling the costs, and he's also the referee when disputes flare up. He manages those. Project manager. The other role is a project sponsor. This is the guy that has usually has the wallet. He's the one that's going to pay for it. He's got the resources. He's the one that's going to authorize, support, and approve the project. He's got the authority, right? Usually he's a member of senior management, not necessarily. And also, the project sponsor could also be the project manager. There's nothing that says it can't be the same person. Project sponsor. So what is a stakeholder? This is anyone that's involved or has an interest in the project's outcome, right? So certainly the project manager, the project sponsor, or anybody involved in the project has an interest in this thing, right? So it can be internal, right? Let's say Nucor is going to build a new steel mill. Well, what will happen then is certainly people in Nucor have an interest in it, but also it's the community where that factory's going to be, the mill's going to be built. It's the government, because they're going to have an interest in the tax revenue. Is interest in the stockholders. Anyone that has an interest in that project's outcome, right? Even if they don't work directly for that company. So it can be internal or external. This is what a stakeholder is. They have an interest in this project. The final role is a team member, and these are persons that are responsible for performing or approving the task to complete a project. They can either work on their tasks themselves. These are the human resources. It could be the engineer, the maintenance people, anybody that's involved in getting this project done. in the example, we're going to work on a house a little bit. So anybody that's actually helping to build that house would be a team member. The other one is the resource managers. Again, these are the people that have control or the authority to release human resources, release money. These are the managers. These are team members. Okay, now it's time to start doing the activity. And I use what's called active learning. So what I do is the questions, I don't necessarily answer them directly in the PowerPoint. They found that the best way to learn is to ask the question and then make it open book, open note, open internet, open instructor. And you have to research a bit, not a whole lot. I don't want to scare you off. But for instance, if we were talking about Greenland, right? If I didn't mention the capital of Greenland, I could ask, what is the capital of Greenland? And when you're researching that, not only do you learn that the capital of Greenland is Nuuk, you might learn that, well, there's about 20,000 people that live there. They eat mostly fish. The average temperature in January is about minus 10 degrees. You learn a lot, right? You can learn a lot more that way. And that's a much better way to learn. I don't need to hear people spit back what I've just told them. I want people to learn, and that's the goal of this thing. It's not about the grade, it's about the learning. If you have any questions, make sure you contact me. But this is it. That concludes our first lesson.